There comes a moment in every life when you must stop running from yourself and finally turn inward, not with fear, but with a kind of steady curiosity. You begin to notice that much of what controls you does so only because you never paused long enough to question it. Old reactions, old insecurities, old beliefs. They linger like guests who overstayed their welcome simply because you never asked them to leave. And yet, if you sit quietly with your own mind, you will realize something profound. Nothing from your past has the authority to decide your future unless you hand it that power. The old you survives through habit, not truth, through comfort, not wisdom, through repetition, not intention. And so the work begins with a single decision, to stand before your own history without flinching and say, I no longer serve who I once was. I serve who I am becoming. This is not arrogance, it is clarity. It is the recognition that your life is shaped not by the noise of your thoughts, but by the choices you make in the quiet moments. The moments when no one is watching, when only your conscience and your courage are in the room. If you can meet yourself there, in that silence, you will discover a strength the old you never had access to, the strength to choose differently, the strength to rise, the strength to build a self your future will not only need, but thank you for creating. There is a quiet turning point in a person's life that rarely arrives with noise, yet it carries more weight than any victory or collapse you've ever lived through. It's the moment you finally recognize that the patterns you've been repeating are not laws written into your destiny. They are simply choices you stopped noticing. And as you sit with yourself, really sit, without distractions or excuses to shield you, you begin to see how much of your current life was built by a version of you that was only trying to survive. That old self meant well, but it was shaped by fears you no longer need to obey, by wounds you've already outgrown, by expectations that were never your own. And once this truth surfaces, it becomes impossible to unsee. You realize that becoming the person your future needs won't come from adding more effort, more noise, more pressure. It will come from releasing what no longer serves the life you're stepping into. So you start observing the familiar thoughts that rise up when you attempt to change, the doubts that whisper you're not ready, the memories that insist you've failed before, the hesitation that pulls you back toward what feels safe. Do not fight them. Fighting only strengthens what you resist. Instead, look at them the way a Stoic would, calmly, directly, without bending. Ask yourself, are these thoughts facts or just echoes from an older chapter? In that question lies freedom. Because once you see that these echoes have no real substance, their hold weakens, and in their place a different presence begins to grow, a steadiness, a maturity, a sense of inner command. You start realizing that every moment offers you two selves, the one you've outgrown and the one you are still learning to become. And each time you choose patience over impulse, discipline over comfort, intention over habit, you take one more step away from the old identity that once defined you. Change is not a dramatic transformation. It is a quiet, persistent unlearning. It is the slow, gentle shedding of what you no longer need. And though the world might never notice these internal shifts, your future self will feel every one of them like a foundation being rebuilt stone by stone. So breathe, slow the mind, and remind yourself you are not trapped by who you were, you are responsible for who you choose to become. The old you had its time. Now, the future is asking for someone stronger, clearer, more disciplined, and that version of you begins right here by letting the old self finally rest. There is a certain honesty you must practice with yourself if you truly wish to rise, not the kind of honesty that comes from confessing your mistakes to others, but the deeper kind, the honesty that requires you to look at your own mind without turning away. When you do this, you start seeing how often you cling to old versions of yourself simply because they are familiar. You hold on to old fears because they feel predictable. You repeat old behaviors because they demand nothing new from you. But familiarity is not the same as wisdom, and every time you choose what is familiar over what is necessary, you give up a little of your potential. Epictetus taught that no one is free unless they master their reactions, and mastering your reactions begins with understanding what still controls you from within. So let your awareness widen. Notice how certain thoughts try to pull you back into who you used to be. The thought that tells you change is too slow. The thought that says you are not worthy of a different life. The thought that insists your past defines the limits of your future. These are not truths. They are habits of the mind. They are remnants of the old self trying to survive. And the old self is clever. It will disguise itself as caution, as comfort, even as logic. But when you look closely, you will see the same pattern, a quiet resistance to growth. And this resistance is not something to escape, it is something to understand. Because once you understand it, its power begins to fade. Allow yourself to sit with the discomfort that arises when you step away from your old identity. That discomfort is evidence that you are stepping into territory you have never walked before. Do not rush it. Do not judge it. Let it teach you. Your future self is built in these uncomfortable moments, not in the easy ones. Growth asks for patience, discipline, and a willingness to let certain parts of you dissolve so something stronger can take their place. You are not losing yourself by letting go of the old you. You are uncovering yourself, your truest, most capable form, and each day you have the chance to move closer to that version, not by force, but by choosing clarity over confusion, intention over impulse, and truth over the comforting lies of who you used to be. There comes a time when you must recognize that the life you want cannot be built on the same foundation that held the life you're trying to leave behind. The old you was shaped by circumstances you didn't choose, by voices that weren't yours, by moments when you didn't yet know your own strength. But now you stand in a different place. You've lived enough, struggled enough, questioned enough to understand that change does not arrive through wishing. It arrives through responsibility, through the quiet decision to take ownership of your inner world. Epictetus reminded us that the only true power we possess is over our own mind. And when you finally accept that, a new clarity appears. The old you was never your enemy. It was simply untrained, unguarded, uninformed. And now, it's time to guide yourself towards something higher. Begin by observing how easily the old patterns try to pull you back. A single doubt, a familiar distraction, a comfortable habit. They appear the moment you choose a different path. But don't mistake their presence for a sign of failure. They show up because the mind resists what it does not understand. Growth feels dangerous to the parts of you that survived on comfort and repetition. So they cling, they protest, they whisper reasons to stay the same. Yet beneath all this noise you will feel something else, a steadiness rising within you, a calm certainty that you are meant to move forward, not remain trapped in cycles you've already outgrown. That certainty is not dramatic, it's not loud. It's a quiet knowing that your future self deserves more discipline, more clarity, more commitment than the old you was capable of giving. And that is perfectly fine, because you are capable of evolving beyond your former limits. Allow yourself to shed the identity built from fear and carry only what aligns with the person you're becoming. With each moment of awareness, with each choice made from intention rather than impulse, you create space for a stronger self to emerge. Not a self built for perfection, but a self built for resilience, purpose, and inner command. Remember, transformation is not a single event. It is a continuous unfolding, and as long as you remain willing to release who you were, you give life permission to reveal who you can be. As you move further into this journey of shedding the older versions of yourself, you begin to notice something subtle yet profound. The world doesn't change when you decide to grow. You change, and that shift alters the way you see everything around you. The same situations that once triggered you now reveal lessons. The same people who once drained your energy now show you where your boundaries were missing. The same challenges that felt overwhelming in the past now appear as opportunities to strengthen the qualities you've been cultivating within. This is the quiet power of inner transformation. Nothing outside you bends to your will, yet everything starts to feel different because you are approaching it with a clearer, steadier, more disciplined mind. Epictetus often reminded his students that the greatest burden we carry is not the hardship itself, but the judgment we attach to it. When you begin to rise above the narrow lens of your old self, those judgments lose their grip. But understand this truth clearly: the old you will not disappear in a single moment of resolve. It will return in waves, in impatience, in frustration, in the temptation to slip back into old patterns that once offered comfort. And in those moments, you must remember that progress is not measured by how rarely you fall. It is measured by how willingly you stand back up with awareness instead of shame. The old self thrives on guilt. The new self grows through understanding. Each time you catch yourself repeating an old behavior and choose a different response, you weaken the identity that no longer serves you. This is the slow, steady rebirth of your character. It does not happen through force, but through consistent awareness, through pausing before reacting, through questioning the stories your mind offers you, through choosing the action that aligns with the person you are becoming rather than the one you once were. And as you continue this practice, you will notice an inner shift that cannot be easily described but can always be felt, a deeper sense of control, not over the world but over yourself, a sense of calm that doesn't come from everything being perfect, but from knowing you no longer crumble when things go wrong. This is the kind of strength Epictetus taught, the strength that comes from discipline, clarity, and the courage to trust your own judgment. When you begin to live from this place, the old self slowly dissolves, not through violence but through irrelevance. It simply no longer fits the life you are building, and in its absence, a new version of you begins to stand with a steadiness that feels earned, not gifted. This is the path, and you are walking it. There will come a day when you finally understand that growth is not something you chase, it is something you allow. It does not arrive with force or urgency. It unfolds when you stop negotiating with your excuses and begin living in accordance with your inner principles. Epictetus taught that nothing outside our control deserves the power to disturb our peace. Yet most people spend their lives fighting shadows, imagined fears, old memories, unfinished arguments, with people who no longer matter. And all the while the old self remains alive, fed by every moment you spend resisting rather than observing. So pause. Let yourself breathe in the present moment. Notice how much lighter you feel when you stop wrestling with what cannot be changed. This is where transformation begins, in the surrender of unnecessary battles and the acceptance of what is within your influence. As you settle into this awareness, you'll begin to notice how much of the old you was built on reaction. A quick response to discomfort, a defensive posture toward criticism, a tendency to interpret everything as a threat to your identity. These reactions were not failures, they were survival mechanisms. But survival is not the path to mastery. Mastery requires presence. It requires the courage to let situations unfold without immediately assigning them meaning. It requires trusting your ability to respond wisely rather than impulsively. When you start approaching life from this calm center, the old self loses its ground. It cannot survive in an environment where you no longer panic at every uncertainty or cling to every fear. And with this newfound steadiness, you begin to experience something rare, the freedom to choose your direction without the weight of old narratives dragging behind you. You notice your habits shifting, not because you forced them to, but because you finally see the cost of holding on to them. You recognize that discipline isn't punishment, it's liberation. You see that self-control isn't restriction, it's strength. You feel a subtle but undeniable shift in how you carry yourself, as though your mind has taken a deeper breath and decided that clarity is more valuable than comfort. This is the quiet evolution of your character. Slow, intentional, built on the willingness to observe rather than react, to understand rather than judge, to release rather than cling. The old you will try to return, but each time it does, you'll meet it with a calm awareness that weakens its influence, and slowly, steadily, a new identity forms, one built on responsibility, presence, and inner command. This is how you become the person your future needs, not through a sudden transformation, but through 1,000 quiet moments where you choose truth over habit, clarity over confusion, and growth over fear. You must understand something that is easily overlooked. The person you are now is not a fixed entity. It is a temporary arrangement of habits, thoughts, and reactions, many of which no longer serve the life you are meant to lead. The old self is comfortable in its predictability, but predictability is the enemy of progress. It whispers that what has worked before will work forever, and it clings to repetition as if that alone can provide security. But the truth is that security never comes from repetition. It comes from mastery. And mastery begins when you are willing to let go of the familiar, even when it feels like safety. It begins with the willingness to say to yourself, the way I lived yesterday will not take me where I want to go tomorrow. Notice how the mind resists this realization. It offers excuses, distractions, and rationalizations. It is too hard to change, it says. Others will judge you, it warns. You might fail, it whispers. These are the voices of the old self trying to survive, and you will feel a tension deep within, a kind of subtle pulling backward as if part of you wants to retreat to what is known. Do not fight this tension with anger or frustration. Observe it, understand it. Let it reveal the parts of you that are still clinging, and in that understanding, find your freedom. Because when you see clearly what holds you back, you can release it deliberately, without self-criticism, without hurry, without the need to rush toward perfection Step by step, you will notice your responses changing. Situations that once would have provoked anxiety now meet a quiet steadiness. Thoughts that once spiraled out of control now settle under your observation. This is not magic. It is the slow, persistent work of becoming someone capable of holding themselves accountable, someone who can face life without being consumed by it. And with each passing day, as you continue to release what no longer belongs, a new version of yourself grows, not in a dramatic flash, but like a tree gradually lifting its branches toward the sun. The old self does not vanish overnight, but its hold weakens as your inner authority strengthens, and eventually you will reach a point where the person your future needs is no longer a distant ideal. They are here, emerging quietly, steadily, and inevitably, because you have chosen them over the version of you that was meant only to survive. There is a discipline in letting go that few understand. It is not the act of discarding what you do not like or pretending your past never happened. Rather, it is the conscious decision to examine every part of yourself, the habits, the fears, the attachments, the impulses, and determine what serves the life you are building and what keeps you trapped in cycles of limitation. The old self clings because it fears emptiness, yet the truth is that in the absence of what no longer belongs, a new capacity emerges. There is room for clarity, for strength, for purpose that the old self could never hold. You may feel uncertainty as you stand in that space. You may feel a subtle resistance that whispers, "Stay as you are. It is safer here. Do not be alarmed." This tension is not an enemy. It is evidence that you are stepping into a territory you have not yet mastered, a territory of growth. Every day, every decision becomes a test of your willingness to prioritize who you are becoming over who you used to be. The world will tempt you with comfort, familiarity, and distraction. Friends, habits, even your own mind will urge you to return to the known. Yet if you remain conscious, if you remain deliberate, you will find that each act of resistance against the pull of the old self is an act of creation for the new self, The calm observer within you, the part that can sit and watch thoughts without being consumed by them, is the ally you must nurture. This observer teaches patience, precision, and discernment. It allows you to notice patterns before they dictate your choices. It allows you to respond rather than react, and it allows you to release what is obsolete, knowing that release is not loss, but preparation for what is essential. In this way, transformation is neither sudden nor loud. It is a quiet revolution within the mind. It asks for vigilance, not aggression, for patience, not desperation, for honesty, not judgment. And as you practice this daily, a new identity begins to crystallize, one that moves through life with purpose, steadiness, and clarity, one that no longer bends to impulses born of fear or old conditioning, one that recognizes that strength is built in the spaces where the old self no longer holds dominion. This is the process of becoming. It is not a story told in grand gestures, but in the persistent, deliberate choices that shape who you are, moment by moment, thought by thought, until the person your future requires is not a vision, but a reality that lives in your actions. The path to becoming the person your future needs is rarely obvious, and it is never convenient. It asks of you a kind of honesty that can feel uncomfortable, even unsettling. You are asked to examine the self you have carried for years, the self formed through habit, conditioned by others, weighed down by unexamined fears, and to recognize that many of these elements, though familiar, do not serve the life you intend to lead. The old you is not evil, it is merely untrained. It has survived by repeating patterns that once protected you, by listening to impulses that were never questioned, by clinging to safety when courage was required. And now it is asking to be acknowledged one last time, not with judgment, but with clarity. For clarity, more than courage, is the key to transformation. When you see the limitations of the old self clearly, they no longer have power over you. You will notice the resistance rising. It will appear as self-doubt, hesitation, even nostalgia for a version of yourself that felt easier to live with. Do not be surprised by this. The mind resists change because it fears what it does not yet understand. The old self will plead for attention, reminding you of past failures, of missed chances, of moments you regret. And in these moments you must remain calm. Observe the voice without letting it dictate your action. Ask yourself, does this serve who I wish to become, or does it chain me to who I was? The answer will not always come easily, and yet the practice of asking it is what weakens the grip of the old self. Each time you make a choice aligned with your future rather than your past, you reinforce a new identity. Each time you respond with wisdom rather than reaction, you carve a deeper path into the life you are capable of leading. Transformation does not happen in sudden bursts. It unfolds quietly, steadily, as you confront yourself with patience, as you release what no longer belongs, and as you nurture the strength within you that has always been present but never trained. The future you requires discipline, presence, and self-command. It asks for courage, not in grand gestures, but in the deliberate choices that define every day. And as you continue, you will feel the subtle power of your own mind expanding, the calm assurance that the old self's whispers no longer have authority, and the quiet joy of witnessing the emergence of a stronger, wiser, more capable version of yourself. In this stillness you begin to live not as someone trapped by their past, but as someone consciously crafting the person their future will need. There is a subtle power in realizing that who you were yesterday is not who you must be today. And yet, this is a truth that many avoid, because it requires a confrontation with oneself that is uncomfortable, intimate, and unflinching. The old self is familiar. It has carried you through uncertainty, fear, and hardship. It has protected you in ways you scarcely acknowledged. But familiarity is not a measure of worth, and survival is not the same as mastery. To become the person your future needs, you must begin to distinguish between the parts of you that serve your growth and the parts that merely repeat old patterns. You must approach this task with calm observation, without shame or haste, and with a steadfast willingness to act on what you discover. The mind is a clever entity. It will try to convince you that release is dangerous, that comfort is more important than clarity, that old habits are anchors rather than chains, and in the quiet moments when you face your own reflection, it will whisper the familiar narratives you have lived by for years. Do not succumb to the temptation to answer these whispers with aggression or despair. Instead, respond with awareness. Observe the thought, feel the resistance, and choose a course aligned with the person you are becoming. For mastery is born not from denial of the old self, but from understanding it, learning from it, and then setting it aside where it no longer serves. Every decision, every choice, every deliberate act of self-discipline compounds over time. The strength of your future self is being forged not in dramatic upheaval, but in the steady accumulation of moments where you act intentionally rather than react automatically. You are building a character that can withstand adversity, maintain calm when challenged, and act with integrity when no one is watching. The old self will not vanish overnight, but each conscious step away from it weakens its grip. And as the grip loosens, clarity takes root, calmness emerges, power rises quietly from the mastery of the mind over habit, and slowly, steadily, you will begin to inhabit a self that the old you could never have imagined, a self prepared for the life, the responsibilities, and the challenges that your future demands. You must understand that true transformation is not about adding more to your life, it is about subtracting what no longer belongs. The old self is heavy with repetition, fear, and unexamined patterns. It clings to behaviors that feel familiar, even when they limit you. And yet, so often, we search outward for solutions, believing that changing our environment or acquiring new skills alone will make us stronger. But strength begins inward. It begins with the courage to face yourself without distraction, to examine every thought, every reaction, every impulse, and to ask a single question: does this serve who I am becoming, or does it tether me to who I was? The resistance you feel when you attempt this is not an accident. It is the voice of the old self protesting, fearing irrelevance, fearing the unknown, and in that resistance lies the opportunity for growth. Observe it, name it, understand it, and then act deliberately despite it. Do not rush the process. Transformation is not violent, it is quiet, patient, and unyielding in its consistency. Each time you choose presence over distraction, clarity over confusion, discipline over indulgence, you carve away a small piece of the old self, and each time you do, you create space for the version of you that is capable, calm, and purposeful. This is the essence of Stoic practice, recognizing what is within your control, acting upon it with wisdom, and letting go of what is not. The old self clings to blame, excuses, and reaction. The emerging self acts with intention, resilience, and reason. You are not being unkind to the old version of yourself when you let it go. You are being honest. You are giving life the opportunity to shape you into the person your future requires. And when you meet yourself in this way, in the quiet discipline of choice and reflection, you will discover a strength that is steady, unwavering, and entirely your own. It is here, in these deliberate moments, that the foundation of your new identity is quietly but powerfully being built. Consider this: the old self is not a villain, nor is it a friend. It is merely a habit, a series of patterns and responses that once protected you, guided you, and carried you through uncertainty. Yet, protection is not progress, and guidance is not mastery. The old self survives by repeating what has already been rehearsed, by seeking comfort in predictability, by avoiding discomfort at almost any cost, and so it lingers, subtly influencing your choices, whispering that change is risky, that growth is optional, that what has been is enough. But the truth is different. Life does not ask for repetition. Life asks for presence, for conscious engagement, for the willingness to build yourself deliberately, moment by moment, with clarity and courage. To answer this call, you must recognize the old self for what it is, honor it for the role it played, and then consciously set it aside so that something stronger can emerge. As you step into this process, you will feel the tension between familiarity and potential. The old self will resist, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, persistently. It will appear as self-doubt, as hesitation, as the faint pull toward old routines that once felt safe. You will notice thoughts surfacing that remind you of failures, weaknesses, and fears long buried, and for a moment, it may seem easier to retreat. This is natural. Growth is never comfortable, but if you meet this resistance with calm observation, with a willingness to witness it without surrendering, you begin to transform it into awareness. Awareness is power. Awareness allows you to see which actions are aligned with who you want to become and which are shackled by who you were. Slowly, deliberately, you begin to inhabit a new rhythm. Your choices are no longer dictated by the impulses of the past, but guided by the clarity of intention. You pause before reacting. You question before responding. You measure each action against the person you are building rather than the habits you are leaving behind. In these quiet, persistent practices, the old self loses its grip, not because you fight it, but because it is no longer relevant. And, in its place, a new self begins to emerge, steady, disciplined, aware, and capable. This self is not born in a single moment of revelation, but forged in countless small acts of conscious choice, in the patient surrender of what no longer serves, and in the deliberate cultivation of what does. Step by step, thought by thought, action by action, you are becoming the person your future demands, and in doing so, you honor life itself by living with intention, clarity, and unshakable presence. There is a quiet but undeniable truth that many avoid facing. You cannot carry forward the weight of who you once were and simultaneously create the person your future requires. The old self is composed of habits, fears, and patterns that served a purpose at one time, yet now they act as anchors, holding you in familiar waters when the currents of life are urging you toward new seas. This is not a condemnation, it is observation. Stoicism teaches that clarity arises not from denial of reality, but from an unflinching recognition of it. And what is real is that growth demands release. To embrace what is ahead, you must first disentangle from what no longer belongs. Every thought, every reaction, every inclination that is rooted in survival rather than mastery must be examined, acknowledged, and, if necessary, relinquished. You will notice how much of the old self survives in silence, as subtle impulses rather than loud protests. It will manifest as hesitation when you know the right choice, as distraction when focus is required, as doubt when clarity is available. Do not mistake this for weakness. It is the mind protecting itself from the discomfort of change. Yet within this discomfort lies the opportunity for transformation. When you meet hesitation with observation instead of avoidance, when you face doubt without yielding, you begin to understand the difference between instinct and intention. Instinct serves the past, intention builds the future. And as you consistently choose intention over habit, the contours of a new identity begin to take shape, quietly but inexorably. The process is neither fast nor dramatic. There is no single moment where the old self vanishes, no lightning bolt that transforms you instantly. Instead, the emergence of the new self is a slow, deliberate unfolding, like water carving a canyon over centuries. Each choice, each act of self-discipline, each refusal to be led by the automatic reactions of the past, chisels away the limitations you once carried. And in those spaces cleared, something remarkable happens. Calmness, clarity, resilience, and presence begin to reside naturally within you. You start to recognize your own capacity for steadiness, for judgment, and for action aligned with your highest self. This is the birth of the person your future demands, not in flashy demonstrations, but in the quiet mastery of your own mind and the patient, relentless shaping of your character. There is a profound distinction between who you are and who you think you are. The old self is a construct of circumstance, habit, and the echoes of other people's expectations. It survived because it repeated patterns, avoided discomfort, and held on to what was familiar. Yet familiarity is a poor guide to mastery. The life your future requires is not built on repetition, it is built on deliberate action, reflection, and the willingness to be uncomfortable in the service of growth. To become that person, you must look inward with unflinching honesty. You must examine the impulses that arise unbidden, the fears that linger in corners of your mind, and the habits that repeat without awareness. This is not an exercise in self-criticism. It is an exercise in clarity. The old self is not your enemy. It is simply a version of you that has fulfilled its purpose and now must yield to the demands of what is to come. You will notice resistance as soon as you begin this work. It will appear as distraction, as rationalization, as a voice quietly insisting that what has worked before is sufficient. But growth is never satisfied with sufficiency. Growth demands courage, patience, and the willingness to endure the discomfort of change. Each time you pause before reacting, each time you choose thought over impulse, each time you act in alignment with who you wish to become, rather than who you have been, you chip away at the influence of the old self. This process is neither immediate nor dramatic. It is slow, quiet, and persistent. It works in the spaces between decisions, in the moments where no one is watching, where only your mind and your integrity are present. Through this steady practice you begin to cultivate a new rhythm of being. The old self may still whisper, but it no longer dictates. The thoughts that once provoked fear or doubt now pass like clouds across a clear sky. You feel a growing steadiness, an inner authority that was absent before. You realize that the foundation of your new self is built not on external validation but on the deliberate mastery of your own mind. And as this mastery deepens, you find that the person your future demands is no longer an abstract ideal, but a tangible presence within you, unfolding quietly through every choice, every action, every moment of conscious attention. This is the slow, deliberate art of transformation. A transformation that begins within, radiates outward, and ultimately shapes the life you are capable of living with purpose, clarity, and unwavering presence. There is a certain clarity that comes only when you are willing to meet yourself fully, without excuse or distraction. The old self is easy to cling to because it is known. It is the repetition of habits, the comfort of routine, the familiar reactions that shield you from discomfort. But familiarity is not wisdom. Security is not strength. The life your future requires cannot be constructed from patterns born of survival alone. It must be built from awareness, intention, and deliberate action. To become that person, you must begin by examining yourself with patience, honesty, and courage. Look at the impulses that arise without thought, the fears that subtly guide your choices, and the habits that have long outlived their usefulness. This is not a condemnation of who you were. It is recognition of the truth that transformation demands release. Resistance will always emerge. The mind is skilled at clinging to what is familiar, and the old self will attempt to assert itself in moments of hesitation, distraction, and doubt. It will whisper that change is unnecessary, that comfort is sufficient, that the past defines the limits of what is possible. Do not be fooled. These whispers are merely the echoes of survival mechanisms, remnants of a self that once protected you but now restrains you. Observe them, understand them, and choose deliberately despite them. Each choice you make in alignment with the person you are becoming weakens the hold of the old self and strengthens the foundation of the new. This is the quiet work of mastery, not in dramatic gestures, but in patient, deliberate, persistent effort. As this practice deepens, you will notice subtle shifts in your perception. Challenges that once provoked panic now meet calm reflection. Thoughts that once spiraled now settle under your observation. Actions that once arose from impulse now flow from reason and intention. Through these moments, your new self begins to emerge, not suddenly, not perfectly, but steadily, like a river slowly carving its path through stone. And in that emergence you discover a power that is both quiet and profound, the power to direct your life according to purpose rather than habit, clarity rather than confusion, and wisdom rather than reaction. This is the essence of becoming the person your future demands, a deliberate, patient, unshakable cultivation of self, moment by moment, choice by choice, thought by thought. There is a subtle transformation that begins the moment you stop identifying with every thought that arises, every fear that lingers, and every habit that has carried you through the past. The old self thrives on identification. It convinces you that your impulses, your anxieties, your repetitive behaviors define who you are. And so, without realizing it, you continue to act as a servant to a version of yourself that is no longer sufficient for the life you are meant to lead. To become the person your future needs, you must cultivate the ability to observe without attachment, to notice the rise and fall of thought, emotion, and habit, and to respond with intention rather than reaction. This is the quiet power Epictetus spoke of, the power to govern yourself, to master your mind, and to choose actions that align with your highest purpose rather than the comfort of what is familiar. You will encounter resistance along this path. It is not dramatic. It often comes in the form of hesitation, distraction, or subtle rationalizations that persuade you to remain in the comfort of the old self. It is too difficult to change, your mind may whisper. The familiar is safer, it may insist. These are the last vestiges of patterns that once protected you, and they will attempt to cling as you step into a new way of being. Do not confront them with frustration or force. Instead, recognize them calmly, examine their purpose, and choose a deliberate response. Every time you act from intention instead of impulse, the old self loses influence, and the new self grows stronger. This is the patient, steady work of transformation, not flashy, not immediate, but profound in its cumulative effect. As you practice this daily, a remarkable shift occurs. You begin to notice clarity where there was confusion, calm where there was chaos, and strength where there was once doubt. The old self may linger, but it no longer commands your actions. In its place, a deliberate, mindful, and resilient identity emerges. One capable of meeting the demands of your future with presence, wisdom, and discipline. And though the world around you may remain unchanged, you will experience a profound inner change, the quiet authority of a mind that governs itself, the steady resolve of a character forged in conscious choice, and the freedom to live in alignment with the person your future requires. Step by step, thought by thought, action by action, you are becoming that person. There is a profound moment of reckoning that awaits each of us, though we rarely recognize it until we pause long enough to meet ourselves fully. That moment comes when you realize that the version of you who has carried you through the past, who has endured, survived, and adapted, is no longer enough to take you where life now demands. The old self is a collection of habits, reactions, fears, and comfort zones that once protected you, yet it now quietly restrains the growth that is essential. It is not evil, it is not flawed, it is simply untrained, unexamined, and anchored in what was familiar. To step into your future, to embody the person your destiny quietly requires, you must face this truth: the old self must yield, and it yields not through force, but through patient awareness, deliberate choice, and unwavering attention to the present moment. You will feel the resistance of the old self in ways subtle and persistent. It emerges as hesitation when decisive action is needed, as distraction when focus is required, as doubt when clarity is available. It whispers the familiar stories you have told yourself for years, the stories that kept you safe, comfortable, and predictable. Do not be alarmed by these whispers. They are not enemies, they are indicators. They show you where your attachments linger, where comfort masks avoidance, and where unexamined habits still dictate your behavior. Observe them with equanimity, recognize them as what they are, remnants of a self whose purpose has been fulfilled. And then, with calm determination, act in accordance with who you are becoming rather than who you have been. Transformation is not sudden. It is not born of a single moment of willpower or insight. It unfolds slowly in the consistent, deliberate choices that shape the contours of your character over time. Each time you respond with clarity rather than habit, with courage rather than avoidance, with intention rather than reaction, the hold of the old self diminishes, and in its place a new self begins to emerge, a self grounded in calm authority, resilient presence, and unwavering focus. This is the quiet mastery Epictetus spoke of, the power to govern your own mind, the discipline to act in accordance with reason, and the freedom to live, aligned with purpose rather than compulsion. Step by step, thought by thought, decision by decision, you are shedding the old self and rising into the person your future needs. The process is patient, deliberate, and profound, and it is happening now, in this very moment. There is a quiet strength that reveals itself only when you stop seeking validation from the outside world and begin seeking mastery within. The old self is accustomed to being measured by others' approval, by fleeting successes, by comfort and avoidance. It survives on these external markers because it has never been trained to trust its own judgment. Yet the person your future demands cannot be built on dependence or reaction. It must be built on self, command, clarity, and the deliberate cultivation of virtue. To step into this version of yourself, you must observe the impulses that arise naturally, the habitual ways you protect yourself, and the fears that quietly dictate your choices. None of these are sins or failures. They are merely patterns that have outlived their usefulness. Recognition is the first step. Release is the next. And only then can you begin to act with the calm authority of one who governs their own mind. The process is not comfortable. It will test your patience, your discipline, and your willingness to endure discomfort without flinching. You will notice how easy it is to slip back into old reactions, how tempting it is to yield to familiar distractions, how seductive the safety of repetition can feel. Do not judge yourself for this struggle. It is evidence that growth is occurring. Observe the pull, understand its source, and respond intentionally. Each deliberate action that contradicts the instincts of the old self weakens its grip and strengthens the foundation of the new. Each moment you choose awareness over automaticity, clarity over confusion, and courage over fear. You carve the path of transformation, quietly but inexorably. In time, this steady practice reshapes your inner world. Situations that once provoked agitation now meet with calm. Thoughts that once spiraled now settle into clarity. Impulses that once dominated now yield to intention. This is the subtle, profound work of Stoic self-mastery, not seeking to control the world, but controlling the mind that experiences it. And as the old self recedes, the person your future demands steps forward, a version of you who is present, disciplined, resilient, and unwavering. You may not notice the change in a day or even a month, but it is real, and it is happening each time you observe, choose, and act, with conscious purpose rather than habitual reaction. In this deliberate cultivation lies the quiet, enduring power that shapes destiny. There comes a point in your life when you must stop negotiating with the past and begin negotiating with yourself. The old self, though familiar, is not the source of strength you require. It clings to habit, to comfort, and to familiar fears, and it will attempt to convince you that progress is dangerous, that change is unnecessary, that the familiar is enough. But the life your future demands does not reward familiarity. It rewards clarity, presence, and deliberate action. To meet that life, you must begin by observing yourself without judgment, noticing where patterns persist that no longer serve your purpose. This is not an act of harshness, it is an act of responsibility. The old self was necessary, but necessity does not equal sufficiency. Resistance will arise, and it will take subtle forms. A hesitation before making a choice. A quiet whisper that reminds you of past failures. A fleeting desire to retreat to old habits. These are not signs of weakness. They are signals of change. Observe them, understand them, and act deliberately anyway. Every time you act from intention rather than habit, every time you choose presence over distraction, clarity over confusion, you weaken the influence of the old self. Each conscious choice builds a foundation for a stronger, steadier version of you, one capable of navigating life not with panic or reaction, but with deliberate control and reasoned judgment. Transformation is not sudden, and it is rarely dramatic. It unfolds quietly in the decisions you make, the responses you measure, the patience you exercise in moments of discomfort. Each moment where you resist the pull of old patterns is a small victory, a stone laid in the construction of a new self. And as this new self emerges, you begin to feel a growing calm, a resilience that does not depend on circumstances, and a clarity that illuminates your path. You discover a mind that no longer reacts blindly, a character that no longer bends to fear, and a presence that quietly commands its own life. Step by step, moment by moment, you are leaving behind who you once were and stepping fully into the person your future needs you to be. There is a power in observing yourself that cannot be overstated. Most people live as if they are passengers in their own lives, allowing habit, fear, and circumstance to chart their course. The old self survives in this way, comfortable with repetition and safety, resistant to challenge or change. Yet the person your future requires will not emerge from complacency. They are forged through awareness, through the willingness to look inward with honesty and patience, and through the deliberate shaping of thought, action, and character. This begins by noticing the automatic tendencies that pull you backward. The reflexes of fear, the attachment to convenience, the comfort in repetition, and asking quietly but firmly, do these serve who I am becoming, or do they anchor me to who I was? Resistance will manifest in subtle ways. The mind will attempt to pull you toward familiar patterns, whispering that the old ways are sufficient, that effort is optional, that change is risky. Do not treat these whispers as truths. They are echoes of the self that was necessary once but is no longer adequate. Meet them with calm observation, name them, understand their function, and then act in alignment with the deliberate, disciplined self you are cultivating. Every conscious choice that favors clarity, courage, and presence weakens the grip of the old self and strengthens the foundation of the new. Transformation is not abrupt. It is the cumulative effect of countless small, intentional acts. As you continue this practice, you will feel a profound shift. Situations that once provoked anxiety now meet measured thought. Thoughts that once spiraled now settle under your awareness. Habits that once controlled you now bend to your intention. The old self does not vanish instantly, but it loses influence with every mindful choice you make. And in its place, a new self begins to emerge, calm, deliberate, resilient, and capable. This is the quiet power of Stoic transformation, the mastery of your mind over impulse, the discipline to act with intention rather than reaction, and the freedom to become the person your future requires. Each moment of awareness is a step forward. Each act of deliberate choice is a brick in the foundation of the self you are building. There is a profound difference between reacting to life and engaging with it intentionally. The old self reacts because it has been conditioned by circumstance, shaped by fear, and tethered to habits that once offered safety. It moves quickly, defensively, often without reflection, and mistakes motion for progress. Yet the person your future requires does not respond impulsively. They pause, they observe, they assess, they act deliberately. To cultivate this self, you must begin by noticing the ways your mind continues to operate on autopilot, the judgments that arise without thought, the impulses that seek immediate satisfaction, the fears that quietly dictate hesitation. Observation is the first act of mastery. When you see clearly how you are pulled by the habits of the past, you gain the ability to choose differently, to act from principle rather than impulse. Do not mistake the subtlety of this work for ease. The old self resists quietly but persistently. It will attempt to draw you back into familiar patterns, offering excuses that sound reasonable, distractions that feel necessary, and reassurance in the comfort of repetition. You will feel an internal tension, one part of you clinging to the familiar, another part yearning for growth. Meet this tension with calm resolve. Do not push it away, do not fight it with force, but observe it as a teacher. Each time you respond with thought rather than reaction, with intention rather than habit, the old self's influence diminishes. Each deliberate choice strengthens your presence, steadies your mind, and builds the inner authority required for the life ahead. The process of transformation is not marked by dramatic change, but by the accumulation of consistent, mindful acts. Each time you choose patience over impulse, clarity over distraction, and reason over fear, you lay the foundation for a self that is capable of meeting life on its own terms. Slowly, imperceptibly, you will begin to notice a shift, a steadiness that was absent before, a resilience that does not rely on circumstance, a calm that arises from knowing you are guided by your own judgment rather than the automatic habits of the past. This is the emergence of the person your future needs, deliberate, disciplined, and fully aligned with the life you are capable of creating. There is a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that occurs when you commit to observing yourself without judgment. The old self thrives on unexamined habits, on fear, on reactions that feel automatic, and on the familiar stories you have told yourself for years. It is comfortable, predictable, and resistant to change. Yet the person your future requires cannot be built on the comfort of what has been. They are forged in awareness, in patience, and in the deliberate choices that align with purpose rather than habit. To begin this transformation, you must look at your thoughts, your impulses, your recurring fears, and ask a simple but profound question: does this serve the life I am building, or does it tether me to the past? The answer may not come immediately, but the practice of asking it steadily weakens the hold of the old self. Resistance is inevitable. The mind will seek to protect itself from the discomfort of change. It will offer excuses, rationalizations, and distractions. It will whisper that what has worked before is enough, that effort is optional, that the familiar provides safety. Recognize these thoughts for what they are, reflections of a self that has fulfilled its purpose but no longer serves your growth. Observe them without judgment. Understand their origin, and act intentionally anyway. Each deliberate choice you make in alignment with the person you are becoming diminishes the power of the old self and strengthens the foundation of the new. This is the patient work of mastery, quiet yet profound, subtle yet unstoppable in its long-term effect. Through this consistent, mindful practice, a remarkable transformation occurs. Situations that once provoked agitation now meet calm assessment. Thoughts that once spiraled into doubt now settle under careful observation. Impulses that once dictated action now yield to intention. You begin to inhabit a space of quiet authority, a mind that governs itself, and a character that acts from principle rather than reaction. The old self does not disappear instantly, but its influence diminishes with each conscious act, and in its place a new self emerges, resilient, deliberate, disciplined, and aligned with the life your future requires. This is not a fleeting change, it is a permanent recalibration of who you are, shaped by every mindful choice, every deliberate action, and every moment of awareness. There is a quiet but powerful distinction between enduring life and shaping it. The old self has endured because it had no other choice. It followed instinct, clung to habit, and sought refuge in the familiar. Yet endurance is not mastery. Surviving is not becoming. To embody the person your future requires, you must move beyond mere survival and step into deliberate creation. This begins by observing the patterns that have dictated your life without your conscious approval, the impulses that rise unbidden, the fears that linger, the automatic responses that once protected you but now restrain you. Recognition is the first step. Acceptance is the next. And then, with calm determination, you act. You act not from fear, not from habit, but from reasoned choice, guided by the life you wish to build rather than the life you have inherited from the past. The old self will resist. Resistance comes not with noise, but with subtlety, hesitation, doubt, the faint tug toward old comforts, a familiar story about why change is too hard or why the past defines your limits. These are not enemies. They are indicators of growth. Observe them, understand their source, and move forward anyway. Each deliberate choice that aligns with your higher self is a step away from limitation and a step toward clarity, calm, and inner authority. Each time you respond with wisdom instead of reaction, with presence instead of distraction, the old self loses strength and relevance. Transformation is the quiet accumulation of such moments, unseen by the world, yet profound in their effect. In this steady practice, you begin to notice an inner shift, a deepened resilience, a stillness that does not waver in the face of challenge, a clarity that illuminates the path ahead. The old self does not vanish abruptly, but it recedes, leaving space for a version of you that is deliberate, grounded, and capable. This is the essence of Stoic mastery, the cultivation of a mind and character that act with intention, anchored not in fear or habit, but in principle. Slowly, inexorably, you emerge as the person your future demands, patient, disciplined, calm, and fully present in the life you are consciously creating. There is a remarkable clarity that arises when you begin to take full responsibility for yourself, not just your actions, but your thoughts, your reactions, and the lens through which you perceive the world. The old self has relied on excuses, external validation, and the comfort of routine. It has survived by blaming circumstance, by reacting impulsively, and by seeking safety in the familiar. Yet the person your future demands is forged through accountability, presence, and intentional action. To become this person, you must first recognize where the old self still holds influence, in hesitation, in distraction, in fleeting judgments, in the subtle justifications that pull you back to what is comfortable rather than what is necessary. Awareness of these patterns is not a condemnation. It is the first step in reclaiming mastery over your own mind. Resistance will arise as naturally as breath. The old self does not surrender easily. It seeks to preserve itself in quiet, persistent ways. It appears as doubt when courage is required, as distraction when focus is demanded, as a voice whispering that the familiar is sufficient. These are not enemies, they are teachers. Observe them calmly, understand their origin, and act deliberately despite their presence. Each choice made with clarity, each response measured with reason. Each moment where you prioritize principle over habit weakens the hold of the old self and strengthens the foundation of the new. This is the patient, deliberate work of transformation, subtle, steady, and profound in its cumulative effect. As this practice deepens, you will notice a new rhythm within yourself. Situations that once provoked anxiety now meet reflection. Thoughts that once spiraled into confusion now settle under observation. Habits that once dictated action now bend to your conscious choice. Through these consistent, mindful acts, the old self gradually recedes and a new self emerges, disciplined, intentional, resilient, and fully aligned with the life you are capable of creating. This emerging self is not born of external change or circumstance. It is born from the quiet, unyielding cultivation of your own mind and character. Each deliberate act, each measured response, and each conscious moment moves you closer to the person your future requires, shaping a life of purpose, clarity, and unshakable presence. Now, at the edge of understanding, you stand before a simple but profound truth. The person your future demands does not arrive by chance, nor through fleeting inspiration. They are forged through countless quiet choices, through deliberate attention to thought and action, through the steady dismantling of patterns that no longer serve you. The old self will always linger in the corners of your mind, whispering doubt, longing for familiarity, clinging to the past. But its voice is no longer authority, it is merely a memory, a shadow of the person you once were. And you, now awake to this truth, hold the power to act differently, to live deliberately, and to embody the life you have long imagined. Transformation is not sudden. It is a river that carves its path slowly yet relentlessly, cutting through the stone of habit and fear, shaping a channel for the clarity, strength, and presence that define your new self. Each conscious act of courage, each deliberate choice to observe rather than react, each moment of patience in the face of discomfort, accumulates like small drops that eventually form a vast, unstoppable current. Step by step, thought by thought, action by action, you are no longer merely surviving, you are mastering, you are creating, you are becoming. And so you leave behind the old self, not with anger, not with shame, but with calm recognition that it has served its purpose. You embrace the emerging self, with quiet confidence, with steady resolve, and with the knowledge that your life is now guided by intention rather than habit, by wisdom rather than reaction, by presence rather than fear. This is the final lesson of Stoicism. Freedom is not given, it is claimed. Strength is not bestowed, it is cultivated, and the person your future needs is already within you, waiting for your conscious choice to fully awaken. Step forward and live as they would. Step forward and become unstoppable. Step forward and honor the life you were always meant to create,